Moving down here, we have the color wheels. There's 3 different flavors of color wheels. You've got your primary wheels, you've got your primary bars, and then you have your log color wheels. And these each have different uses. Okay, the primary wheels and the primary bars work essentially the same, except they're just a different user interface to try to get more specific about what channels you're operating on. But primaries versus log do have a difference, and let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, so the difference here is that primaries will affect your image in more broad strokes. Okay, so if you're adjusting your lift, that'll really change your shadows, but it'll also affect your image all the way up to a little bit of your highlights. Gamma will affect your midtones very largely and very strongly, but it'll also extend all the way up to a little bit of your shadows and a little bit of your highlights. And gain is similar, where it affects all of your highlights, but then does push all the way down to affect a little bit of your lift. Using the log color wheels is more specific. Okay, the midtones will just affect the midtones and won't touch the shadows or the highlights. There's no overlap into that section. Same thing with the shadows and the highlights. However, what you can do is you can change the low range and the high range to move how much overlap there is and how much these would extend down into the shadows or up into the highlights. Same with the shadows and the highlights. You could extend the shadows up into the midtones and the highlights down. So this gives you more specificity. Is that a word? It gives you more ability to be fine-tuning where those adjustments are taking place. Okay, so if we go back, you can take a look here inside of Resolve, and we'll do a little bit of that here. Okay, so if I bring up my primary wheels here, I can adjust my exposure to my gamma here, and I can push this up, and you can see in my scope here that raises the midtones. Okay, if I do lift, I can pull my lift down, I can give more contrast to the image, and you can see that it pulls it down that way, right? But let's do the gain a little bit, bring this up pretty wide so we can see the difference. Now you notice as I pull this gain up and down, you can see if you're looking down at the waveform that it does affect a little bit way down here in the shadows, even by doing that, right? If I push this offset and push these up a little bit further here, that pushes everything up the waveform. Now let's switch over to the log mode. If I grab my shadows and I start to pull these down, look what happens inside of the waveform. It's just grabbing a specific portion of the waveform and dropping that down. And I can change the low range. If I lower that and start to do that again, now look at what my waveform is doing. It's just grabbing even a smaller portion. And so this is a way that you can grab just the tiniest clip of the shadows or the highlights and be able to adjust and manipulate those. So now I'm barely at the very bottom. And you can see that how it's adjusting in the image. If you look closely, you can see how the shadows, the very tips of those shadows are clipping out when I pull that down. Okay, so that's how the color wheels work. It's the same kind of idea with the primary bars. You can adjust the exposure this way, and you can see how much it's adding to each of those levels. And then you can also do that specifically with just specific channels here. So that can be useful when you're trying to grab just a specific RGB channel. And then finally, along the bottom, you'll see there's these different options that you can change here. So there's also you can change the contrast easily here, using this contrast slider. Same thing with saturation. You can increase the saturation. You can also change the hue of the image. Those are simple little options that are there available for you. There's a second menu that you can also change some more of those information there. And this will change depending on whether or not you're looking at log or the primary color wheels. Okay, so now in log, you can change the low range and the high range, but still some similar things with contrast and saturation. Okay, so that's how the color wheels work. Let's go ahead and move on to the RGB mixer.